And the same situation in every organization has always been looking at, these are things that are needed, but how do we pay for them? It's nice to want, but you have to be able to pay for them or be willing to give up something.
Hi, I'm Mac Anya, the CEO of the Maine Heritage Policy Center, and we're here with yet another gubernatorial interview on policy. Donna Dion has been nice enough to join us here this morning, and really appreciate you joining us and having a conversation about where you'd like to take the state. Thanks for coming, Donna.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
You bet. So the first question I'd like to ask you is a pretty popular one for people running for governor, and it's probably maybe the easiest one for you to answer. But what is it that brought you to make the decision to actually run for governor? Was it a policy you wanted to accomplish? Was it some sort of idea that really motivated your candidacy? What was it that sort of called you to run?
Well, actually, that's a long story.
All right, I love long stories.
Because in 2008 is when I actually decided I wanted to run for governor. And I was the candidate that at 5:03 showed up on the 4th floor of the Secretary of State in 2010 and was not allowed to be on the ballot.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And so I converted at that time and declared as a write-in because I had been already campaigning for 9 months. And so I wanted to see if I had any impact because I would, and at that time it was similar to what it is right now. It was policy moving Maine forward. There wasn't as much arguments going on during that time, but things were moving slowly. I had looked at, I was presently working with a nonprofit organization at that time, and the funding, it was changing, Department of Health and Human Services. So that's when I began. And then it's kind of hard because I try to work as a clean candidate. So I was constantly looking at our financial position, and I retired in January, on January 4th, and I declared on January 2nd. But my husband and I had been talking that whole time about this, and that we were in agreement. He knew that I always had been thinking about it, and we had been talking about it. Friends had been teasing me for 8 years. When are you coming back, and when are you doing this? So that's, and then obviously, my platform is respect. So obviously that tells you what was the final thing that pushed me over the edge is the disrespect that exists. And that we weren't getting any issues completed, but we were doing more about political tags and about personalities. And I decided the issues that existed 8 years ago are the same issues we're talking about, except for a few new ones that are critical, the gun issue and the safety. But other than that, the same exact issues that were on my information 8 years ago are still the ones that are being talked about.
I had the opportunity to interview you on WGAN just a couple weeks ago, and I remember one of the things that stood out for me at that time when we were doing the interview was the fact that you referred to yourself as kind of the fiscal candidate. And in that regard, you're really talking about making sure that the ideas that you're proposing are actually feasibly paid for in some respect. And I think you actually answered that question in response to one of the referendum conversations that were being had. Talk to me about that sort of approach that you have. And what you think the importance of sort of fiscal management is.
I think it's very important. That's how I became mayor of the city of Biddeford. I was working for a nonprofit, and I was going to each city and asking if they would consider us on their budget for $500. Well, I got to my own community and I sat in the audience. I said, ooh, I have a problem with accountability. And so I proceeded to look at more things. And because I am checks and balance, 45 years in the number business is what I call it, but I always look at big picture. So I became mayor. And the same situation in every organization has always been looking at, these are things that are needed, but how do we pay for them? It's nice to want, but you have to be able to pay for them or be willing to give up something or are willing to accept some additional charges on something. And I got concerned because people just keep throwing really special issues out there. It would be great for all of us to have single pay insurance. It would be great for us to work toward that. All of these issues that are being brought up for economic development and whatever else, you have to prioritize. So for me, My whole intent wasn't that I'm that strong advocate. I am. It would be nice, but I'm not going to say it's going to happen in 6 months or in 365 days, to make a point of it. It's going to happen as we evaluate where the money's being used. And even 8 years ago, when I tried to be, governor at that time, I had started investigating numbers and looking at who was getting tax exempt, where were the specialty areas, Pine Tree development, and did those people follow through on what they were supposed to do, because they did get some exemptions. Can we take those exemptions and turn them to somebody else financially? Can we help some other businesses expand, do capital investments? But at the same time, what's the basis of a strong workforce is training. So yeah, we need to have the medical benefits. We need to cover everybody. We don't want a sick workforce. We want a healthy workforce. But how do we do these within the money that we have before we automatically run off and charge additional taxes to everybody? So for me, it's fiscally your responsibility as governor is to set the tone and the direction. And it's not no, no, no. It's an answer justifying what we looked at. What are we willing to do? And the people want to get involved, that's fine. But if you want us to do this and not tax you, okay, but at the same time, we can't use, we're going to tax the rich. We keep taxing the rich. I feel like that's a finger in a leak in the dam, and eventually it's going to blow up anyways. And so we need something long term where we're looking at financial responsibility across the board and implementing things, because we need to implement some stuff and make us more of a destination, power, cheaper electricity, turning to renewable energy, education especially, connecting those kids early on. So some of this stuff doesn't cost us lots of money, but it costs us to focus and bring the right people to the table and stop arguing about that's my idea or that's your idea.
Right. Well, a lot of the debate about sort of paying for stuff obviously relates to who pays and how, and the question of that really relates to taxes, and you brought it up just a moment ago. And we've seen, God, there's so many moving parts. Recently, there's so many things that are being changed in the tax code, both legislatively and then through the referendum process. Obviously, you've seen on the legislative side, you've seen the LePage administration continue to push not only the tax cuts that have been enacted in his first term, and then some additional ones that happened after the last legislative session before, getting that rate down to 7.15, but he's been proposing radical changes to it. I mean, he wanted it to get down to 6.5 or 5. Yes. And then raise the sales tax and then broaden it, while also taking out some of the exemptions, et cetera, et cetera. So on top of that, of course, you have what happens in the referendum process, where you have Maine People's Alliance sponsored initiatives that have tax and finance stuff tied to it, which have raised our income tax rate briefly above 10%, and now we have another one on the referendum this year that's going to be doing something very similar. And so we're constantly getting the pressure in the upward direction through those means. Let's say that Donna Dion is not governor of Maine, but she's actually emperor of Maine, and she has total, complete power to do anything she wants. What would you actually like to see the tax environment in Maine look like? How would you design it if you had no opposition and you didn't need to convince anybody of anything? What is your dream of what Maine's tax system looks like?
I look at the state of Maine as an industry in itself because of tourism. And it's funny, the tourism organization, and I respect their approach, is that you can't put additional taxes on anything in tourism. People won't come to Maine. Well, I'm going to tell you, people are coming to Maine. They will continue coming to Maine. I mean, I travel and I look at a price of a motel and all that stuff. And I don't really go and say, what's the tax, levels? They're 7, and they're 8, or they're 10 for rooming. And as a result, they have this, and I've been looking at those things because those are important, because they're an industry. It's like demand, cost and demand. When individuals want something, all of a sudden the cost goes up for a vehicle or a specific item. And I don't want to be outrageous, but I think if you look across the board, you have to be impacting those individuals that are utilizing our state. And they do pay sales tax when they're here, and they're paying obviously they're rooming here and they're vacationing here. But I think there is a slight increase in some of the taxes for individuals utilizing our resources that would help us for our infrastructure and give us a breathing room.
Is it something you'd be marrying with sort of a large wholesale reform to the income tax system at the same time? I mean, do you think that the push to go higher and higher on the income tax, which has been, again, going back to these referendums again, has been sort of the frequent trend recently. Do you think that's a smart move, or is it not a smart move? And I ask this because there seems to be disagreement among some Democrats and other people, particularly independents, who look at this and say this is wise or not wise. It's the goal versus how you're actually acquiring it. People are very concerned about the impact that income tax is going to have on sort of who lives here and why. So, I mean, do you share that concern, or do you think that it's not really one that does impact those decisions on people leaving?
I think we look at, it's not a single issue, because it's so complex. You have to look at the impact across the board. We're trying to increase our businesses internally by not putting pressure on them, but at the same time they're paying their fair share. But when some individuals are indicating like the 3%, let's get the higher income individuals to pay that 3%, to pay that education, get it up to the 55%. That is such a just surface comment because it's so complex. First of all, I'm saying as soon as you do that 3%, you just hit mom and pop store right down the street. Right. Because they already fall in that category, and they're going to be injured, and they're having a hard time.
You're talking specifically of pass-through entities that people are using basically their own personal income tax to pay their business taxes, yeah.
Yes, and I'm saying, this is not acceptable. I was at one of the TV forums, and we did one of those single yes or no questions, and the question was, are you going to address it as an aggressive tax and immediately go to the wealthier and I was the fourth one in a series of 7 people, and and they went yes, yes, yes.
Right.
And they got to me, and I said no on TV. My husband said, "You're probably, that's the death of you," but that's the truth. You can't say yes right away because you have to evaluate the overall picture, and then it followed afterwards. It was yes, yes, yes.
Right.
And I said that's not the direction we have to go, because eventually it's not going to work, and you're going to have to turn around and put pressure on some other parts of our community, but you're always hitting business. And they said, well, we don't need to, bring in more big businesses. We'll just work with our small entrepreneurs. Well, those are your big businesses in this community because they fall in those categories that you're currently putting taxes on. So it has to be a broader picture. So for me, I looked at the tourism industry. Plus, I did look at the non-resident property owners of the state of Maine and did a couple of cities and looked at it. Now, the non-resident property owners who pay not a single penny in sales income tax. They pay sales tax. They do everything we do, right, but they don't pay any income tax. They could be corporations. It could be personal homes. But they're here weekends, all summer. They don't pay a single penny into our income tax system. So I went researching, and there's 7 states that do something in order to get these individuals to assist with the infrastructure of the state. I'll even utilize my community, Biddeford. Conservatively, I know there was 800 actual buildings ranging from 400,000 to $3 and $4 million, and they are from out of state. They don't work here. They don't pay any income taxes. So I'm in the process of checking because some of them may have declared something, and so I need to do that cross section. So even if we took 50% of that, that's 400. And even if we gave them a basic service fee, then you could put, just for discussion points, they $200, and they pay $100 in October and $100 in April when the taxes come along, and it's on their tax bill, but it's a service fee that goes to the state for infrastructure. Think about that in all the resorts we have. The Sunday Rivers, the Sugarloaves, as well as all of the lakes in the Rangeley area, and that these individuals don't pay anything. And we're not talking about really, injuring them, but having them pay for stuff that they utilize. That is being done in other locations. It's very lucrative. And I think we need to start looking at our entire base. I mean, we were at Mount Desert Island And the question there, I always seem to be the odd man out. The question was, do you think nonprofits should be paying their taxes? And the answer was no, no, no. And it came to me, and I said, no, they shouldn't be paying their taxes, but they should be paying a fee. I worked 20 plus years with the nonprofit arena, and there is some communities that instead of taxes, they charge us a fee because we use their infrastructure fee. We use fire and
Right, you
police
consume the
and
services without having to pay into the tax
that's
rolls.
right.
Yeah.
So I said for nonprofits, just for discussion points, because this is not what I would do, because I would work with everyone to collaborate and work something. But I said, what if we charge $100 a year to each nonprofit? Okay, that's steady money going into, be it stays in the community, to assist them with their infrastructure. But you look at the number of nonprofits. I'm saying that it probably should more go in every community should have some. Some of them don't have a lot of nonprofits, but there is.
Some do, though. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if they're receiving more money and revenue sharing can go higher in other communities that don't have all of these additional funds, then we're sort of sharing the revenue so everyone can be successful, everyone can get a little breather, and not everyone is overburdened. And we need to look at that. We're all part of one state. You know, people keep saying divisions, and I have a hard time with that. I never thought of Maine as District 1 and District 2. I look at Maine as Maine, and each of us have individual resources. So if we look at how do we pull some of that money together for all these private homes that are on lakes that you don't have access to, and help those communities and help our communities, we can build an infrastructure which we need above and beyond getting involved in broadband and trying to get communication throughout the state. So these are things how I look at it. I look at those issues that we have on the table we want to do to make life better, but we need to build in order to get to life being better. And how do we all participate in that?
You know, when we're talking about the tax environment and we're talking about government spending and everything else, you know, it seems to me that this is all tied into trying to create an economy and a state that actually attracts people rather than loses them. I mean, that's when I talk about taxes, that's usually why I'm so critical of a higher income tax. I mean, I see the people leave. I mean, you know, the people who support the Maine Heritage Policy Center are now no longer living here. And it's a problem, and so I think that is also tied towards, you know, creating businesses and jobs and other things that would attract somebody maybe my age to the state and actually bring them here. And so I guess why I'm setting it up like this is because obviously Maine is currently living through a tremendous problem as it relates to that attraction of people, right? We have more people dying than were born. And it's a cliche at this point, but it's true. And our, you know, population size really only ever goes up because we have some sort of net immigration into the state. Can something be done to fix that? I mean, this is something that's been talked about by politicians for, what, 2-3 decades now, where we are losing our kids and we're not replacing them with new ones. And so we're going to do something to fix it, and then, of course, another decade goes by and we haven't. And our average age is up to like 45 now. Can that be addressed through government action, or is this just a larger social trend that we really don't have much control over?
No, I think we can assist in making it better. I think it would be one of the goals of as governor when I got into that, to set that tone, which I said indicated in direction. But I need to market. This needs to, as I said, destination. Earlier on I said destination. We need to not be discouraging. I know their way of addressing it from some of the candidates is, oh, we don't need those big businesses coming in. We can just deal with the businesses we have. Well, we need to deal with the businesses we have and give them the opportunity to grow. But at the same time, we need to be able to provide them with people to fill those slots that we're trying to grow. And that takes into consideration good wages, good benefits. And I mean, we recently, you know, look at IDEX. That's an organization during my lifetime. I'm part of that old group that's dying away. I've watched them grow. I've seen them grow, and I have friends that work there. So lots of times I looked it up. And so taking organizations that are here and not injuring them, but encouraging them to grow, but at the same time showing that, you know, publicizing what's going on with IDEX and their successes, and the fact that they can live in this wonderful state with all its resources and its natural resources, and be able to enjoy that. So, you know, you work Monday through Friday, but what you can do on Saturday and Sunday, and providing broadband along with that is all of those things are like carrots that pull the people in. But how do you do that? One of the things that even a long time ago, I was working with schools when I was mayor. How do we figure out what interests the kids? How do we look at...
Well, that was actually going to be my question to you, Donna, because, I mean, in order to even solve the question, this seems to be the critical failure of all lawmakers that have addressed this problem over the last couple decades, is they say we got to bring the kids back, and then you ask a politician, so what exactly do the kids want? You know, I mean, you kind of have to answer that question to attract them back.
Absolutely.
And I'm still reasonably young, so I think I can probably answer it a little bit. I mean, I grew up in Maine, I moved away, and I moved back. And if I wasn't so insistent on being back here, I probably wouldn't have made that decision, because I took a pay cut, and I also took a cut on the top of my taxes to come here. So I was in, you know, sort of a less advantageous financial position to move back to the state. I have less options if this place ever were to blow up. I would have no, you know, fallback the way that I would in some of the other places that I've lived across the country. And, you know, there are things that are missing here that might have attracted me if I was somebody who wasn't so in love with the state of Maine, right? And so I guess my question to you is, to answer your own question, what is it that young people actually want, you know, in a place to live, and how do you satisfy those wants?
And the funny thing is, Maine's economy is always on a roller coaster ride. And at one time I was young, and I, at 29, left the state of Maine. And for almost 5 years, we lived in Rochester, New York, for the reason of better pay, security.
In upstate New York, that's interesting, yeah.
Growth and opportunity, but culturally, Eastman Kodak is there. So culturally, there was all this other things that interest me. I came back, for me, I came back for a sad reason. You know, my dad was terminally ill, and I made that decision to give up the job. That's when I was working for Time Warner.
Yeah.
And that's when I gave up the job after 12 years, and I came back to Maine, and I literally cut my wages by 50%.
And it seems to me that that's exactly why people are moving back now. It's for some sort of reason that pulls you despite the challenges that you have coming back. I came back because I really wanted to be here. My dad had passed away recently. I missed the state, obviously, quite a bit. I missed my family, those types of things. So I had a real strong affinity for the state. But I lived in a very vibrant city that had a lot of stuff to do, and it was very interesting, and it was a very young city. It was like average age of 27. You know, it was definitely my kind of people. The average wage was tens of thousands of dollars higher, more opportunities, less taxes. All these things on top of each other meant that it was sort of a mistake financially to move here, and in so many other ways. And I'm looking at my class that graduated in high school, and I'd say 2/3 of them live in North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Arizona. You know, you name it, they're somewhere else. So how is that addressed? I mean, that's a really big problem here.
It is, and that's why looking at industry, you know, when they said just look at the businesses that are here, I think we need to do more medical research and development. We need to, for example, and this is just recently, I am now Medicare. I'm 66 years old, and I was trying to get some clarification on something. This is a system we're spending a lot of money in. And you know where they're administering this stuff? In the Philippines. I am talking to somebody, and I said, you know, we could be doing some of those kinds of processing, which means high-tech, you know, accounting people. And then in research and development, we need engineers and chemical engineers and research and development. I think we should be stabilizing our businesses, increasing them if they can grow, and if not, then luring the businesses that can come in. But we need to be able to allow them to pay reasonable wages and benefits. So we need to work on the insurance. So
it's really a cost issue for them, right? If they're going to be able to do that, they have to be able to have the financial flexibility to do that, which is where I think this money candidate stuff comes in, right?
Yes, absolutely. You can't say you're already going to be poor before you get here, because all the things you're going to have to pay is going to take everything away, and you can't see the benefits of being in the state. How can I sell you the state, which we adore and love, if you can't get beyond that bottom line? Okay, and it's not always, and I respect businesses obviously would like money in their bottom line and their shareholders, but at the same time, they would like to have a strong workforce. So for us, we have to build all of those tools in order to sell it. That's a package. You know, we've got, you know, we'll say school centers of technologies, community colleges, high schools. working at fine-tuning our students to find their uniqueness and make sure we connect them to things that they like to do.
You know, when we're talking about attracting people and making it easier for businesses to be able to afford to offer better salaries and what have you, one of the interesting issues that impacts that is energy, because I mean it costs a lot to actually consume energy in this state, not just from a consumer side, but if you talk to some larger businesses that have, you know, large real estate and warehouses and what have you, I mean the cost of just heating those places and actually operating them and providing electricity to it runs into the hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. It's a very expensive prospect to do that, and Maine is better than its New England neighbors in terms of cost of energy. That is 100% true. But it's also nationally not that competitive. We debate energy quite frequently in the state legislature. What is the right pathway forward for Maine as it relates to energy? We hear Democrats frequently talk about prioritizing clean energy and trying to provide subsidies for wind power and so on and so forth. You hear Republicans frequently talk about Hydro-Quebec, and you talk about sometimes nuclear power or something that would provide cheap electricity as the main goal rather than the clean electricity that Democrats frequently cite. What is, you know, as you look at this universe, what is it, your priority set in terms of energy policy?
I think it's a transition, and we can't go backwards. We can't go backwards, but we can actually, when I did some of my research, some of the things that Maine did, which I think out of fear, you know, you talk about nuclear plants, which is on the Republican side. You know, if you don't have it, you don't want to reestablish it because you want to go away from that. But the fact is, I think we lost an opportunity because we eliminated
Maine Yankee, yeah.
And looking at the information, said it was pretty sound, and we could have gone longer.
It had some critical problems, but if they were fixed, it's basically
right.
Yeah.
Because I then made some analysis with other locations that have nuclear plants and how they've invested some money, which would have been less than what we're trying to do now, and we could have kept them in order to do a better transition and had cheaper electricity. So you can't go backwards. So you say, okay, so how do we look at the surrounding areas, and how do we connect with other sources of electricity to assist us as we're doing more research and development for the renewable energy and transition. It can't be one way or the other. I can't avoid this and say, guys, you have to pay maybe some higher electricity and we're going to get here. We need to have a happy medium here. So looking at other grids, even it was brought to me, which I'm just starting to research, is the Canadian grid, electrical grid. So is there some way for us to provide some supplemental electrical power during the time we're transitioning to some other renewable energy, so that we're not automatically just going to be hiking our power sources. So for me, you know, this is like a new venture, even though I had looked at nuclear plants when Maine Yankee was being closed, and met a lot of people who worked there and supported that. They still had some life to it.
So do you support things like the renewable portfolio standard and things that sort of incentivize and oftentimes subsidize those clean electricity sources? You know, do you think that that's something that we should invest money in to try to make possible? I mean, ultimately, wind farms, for instance, you know, they require subsidies to be really feasible if they're going to be competitive, right?
Right, because they have so many things that's connected with them, the ability to store and proper storage.
Right.
Because if you don't do it, you can have all of these windmills, and they're producing electricity at that time, but it's not proper storage, so you're not really you're not gaining anything, because later on then we have to get back on our power grid, and it takes up more.
But that's state resources that you're spending on it if you want to go in that direction. So yeah, I guess, should we be prioritizing that, or is our main goal trying to get electricity lower in general? I'm not suggesting putting smokestacks up in the state or anything.
No. I'm looking back at everything I look at. It has to be big picture. We can't say, okay, we're going to avoid that right now, and I'm going to concentrate and put all of our resources in one location. I think water, hydro. I laugh because that's going backwards. I think about all the mill locations, which are now houses and retail operations, and hydro along the rivers produced all the electricity, and they were self-contained, and they operated, and they actually if proper storage capacity existed. I mean, I have an example. The incinerator, which is really was a super sensitive subject that I addressed, and but they were operating off the river, and they were doing some electricity. But you have to be outside the box aggressive, and those are the kinds of things. You know, would I give somebody a tax exempt if they were going to come in and expand and say, I'm going to expand the hydro thing and in turn be able to sell cheaper?
Well, you do have things like the 100 megawatt cap, right, which basically prevents, obviously, the importation of Canadian hydro, but on top of that, also we've seen some studies that have shown that some of the existing locations in Maine that do actual hydroelectricity could have the capability of actually being over 100 if that cap was lifted. And I think that the cap was originally envisioned as a way of protecting the little guy from the sort of foreign competition and mass electricity production somewhere else. But there's people that could produce over 100 if we lefted that cap. Is that something you would support?
I would definitely sit down and see what kind of impact it's going to have, and coordinate an agreement where the little guys who need this electricity is benefiting, and these big guys are also benefiting because they're able to sell this additional power that you're doing. If there's a product and we can purchase it and everybody can benefit from it, then why would you not put it on the table and talk about it? You know, our limitations are created by the limitations that we've already put. And so for me, nothing is beyond looking at, and any possibility, you know, to increase our abilities to lower those powers, and at the same time increase research and development and address wind and ocean and water, and increase it in all the different areas of Maine, will make Maine more productive.
You brought up the issue of education when you started your comments today as being a critically important thing, obviously. I'm pretty sure we all agree on that one. And it seems to be, having spent some time doing advocacy in the education space, one of those issues that might have some crossover. You know, some Republicans have kids, Democrats have kids. Like, we all want our kids to actually be well educated and produce a workforce that is skilled and has the right perspective on what they're doing. But I think we all tend to agree that we're struggling right now. We're not doing as well as we used to do in educational performance, and there seems to be a lot of things that we're still trying to figure out right now. One of those things is proficiency-based education. You probably saw what happened in Scarborough with the whole recall and the superintendent and the principal and that whole issue. And a lot of it was tied into the issue of proficiency-based education and how to implement it and whether or not it's even implementable. What is proficiency? All these questions circulating around proficiency-based education. Do you have a viewpoint on the wisdom of that in general? I mean, can you really be proficient in all the things that you're supposed to be proficient in? How do you measure proficiency? Should that law be repealed, or should it just be changed, or is it fine?
As I indicated earlier, I spent a couple of years in the school system, from preschool right through high school, because I wanted to see firsthand what was going on with the students and how could we provide supports. And in the meantime, recently, did it again since all of these requirements were placed out there, and ran across some schools that wholeheartedly jumped right on board and developed a system where they were addressing the students and getting them, and they felt that it was very effective. And then I found other systems that were next to smaller communities seemed to be more accepting that they could deal the proficiency. Larger communities where you had a diverse type of student who needed more assistance, more disabled individuals, they spend more time trying to put those things in place, but with a lot of distractions. So as a result, the educational process weakened, and I don't think the students were being addressed as effectively as you wanted them to be. And so I thought, you know, the requirements sometimes do derail the teachers, and so they're not able to provide the kind of teaching that would be specific to individuals of different levels, so that do they all have to be proficient? And if you don't satisfy this, your school is not eligible for funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is all tied to money, and it needs to be tied to the teacher's capabilities of teaching at the levels that the kids need, because I, for one, hate tests. I hate to sit there. I don't care if they're multiple choice. I just hate tests. I hate doing that. And some people, if we do those tests and they don't do well, then you sit with them and everything comes out of their mouth and they're able to be independent, they process, and they're successful. Were they successful if we were doing it based on the standards? And that's something that has to be relooked. The school systems themselves have to be responsible. We need a requirement that the individuals have a basis, that they have to be taught.
Does the state set the basis, like this is what proficiency looks like, or is it something where, I think as it's currently designed, where it seems to be kind of open-ended and it's left up to the local communities to decide sort of what proficiency looks like to them?
Well, I think we need, you know what? I want every student to be successful, okay? And success isn't meaning that their proficiency tests were all in the 8 to 1200 or 1400, whatever the testing results are. I think it is that they every year are able to independently do the math and the processing, and giving them the word processes,
Mm-hmm.
the word problems, and having them work on what would I do. You ask me a question, I have to be processing. And if we're not talking to kids, and it's we're pushing, you need to learn this and you need to learn this and you need to memorize it, but yet if you memorize it, it's gone. I think it's hands-on, and that's why earlier, and I said, in the middle school level, you start touching base with these students because they start having things that they really enjoy or something that draws their attention. And then in high school, you fine-tune them to specific programs and training so that they start realizing, gee, I want to go to college because I need a college degree to go to the next level, because I need a master's to be an engineer. Or someone says, I need to just go to a community college. Or I love tinkering with vehicles. And so I want to be a mechanic, and I love to do that. But they say, I can't get there unless I go to college because I always need a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're doing that child injustice because we're not leading them down the right path. And so I think we need to be working with the schools and working with the colleges and the community college and the places, community colleges for people like plumbers and electricians, because they need licenses,
Mm-hmm.
and carpenters don't at the present time, but they need a skill, a specific skill. And we have a lot of industries. My husband's in that industry. They're just like the rest of us, lacking qualified people to do that.
Yep.
And then you get into the businesses, and I worked with some individuals from Jobs for Maine graduates to see how they're connecting outside businesses, and now they've grown it to more sophisticated internships, and it's sort of like gearing it in the direction that I have been talking about for years. And so I was kind of excited. I spent some time with the president of the University of Southern Maine specifically for that. How are you changing the course or the looks of the school in order to connect these kids, these students, to businesses in our community, so they say, hey, I don't have to go to Massachusetts. I have a paid internship here, and I'm now staying here, and they can see that just because I'm in accounting, I don't have to be in an accounting firm,
Mm-hmm.
that I can be extremely successful in businesses and as they grow. And we get other businesses. I mean, I work for a nonprofit organization. Did I do okay? Yeah, I did okay. And people have to realize those jobs are out there, and you can have a livelihood, and you can still stay in Maine. So it's like a collaboration. That's why earlier, and you said, how are we going to keep the kids here, and how are we going to lure other kids here? First of all, we've already got kids from out of state here, because I went around some of these campuses. These kids, lots of them, don't come from Maine.
You're correct about that, and we'll get to higher education in a minute, but you're absolutely right. University of Maine has seen a dramatic spike in out-of-state students coming into the state, and then, of course, they leave after they go to college, but you're right, they're in here in the first place.
Right, talk to them.
Yeah, and I do want to get to higher education, though, in a minute, but before we move off of sort of K through 12, I guess I have a sort of general philosophical question for you. What's the role of money in education? And I ask that question because right now, Portland's engaging in a debate on their school budget, and you have the mayor sort of on one side saying we have to have more money and it will produce lower class sizes and better results and will give every child a chance to do well, and then you have the city council that says we have to live within our means, et cetera, et cetera. And when Ethan Strimling, the mayor of Portland, is talking about money for schools, he frequently points at the Yarmouths and the Falmouths and the schools that perform well on that U.S. News and World Report's ranking and best in the state and all that, and says that they have high spending per pupil, and then that's one of the reasons why they're so successful. Do you agree with that? Do you think that spending in education correlates with results? And this is an important question because we obviously had the referendum question that proposed to spend so much more money, then the legislature acted and sent a lot more money to schools. Is that going to be causing better education? And if not, should we even be discussing money in education the way that we do? Should it be geared towards different things? Perhaps trying to have a more effective overall education system rather than how much money we spend on it?
I think what's happening in some of the locations, the ratio of students to teachers really does make a difference. I mean, if you have a class of 30-something and you used to have a class of 15, the concentration of the teacher and the ability to figure out what's the best course of action for you as a learner is a lot more difficult. They were trying to do it on the basis of... But
is changing from 17 to 14 really change
No.
much? I mean, my wife's a teacher, right? And she doesn't care what her class size is. She cares when it's jumping by 15 or 20, like you're suggesting there.
Absolutely.
But we obsess over it as though 14 is dramatically different than 18. And these numbers are really picked arbitrarily on what's good and bad, right?
Yeah, and I also don't agree, and I stated it in forums in the past when they talked about education, that just because an individual is not making an entry level of $40,000 doesn't mean that their teaching ability is going to be of a less quality than somebody else. They fall in the same category as everybody else. They have openings. They need to lure people here. If the wages are not adequate, I mean, they're a business. I mean, it's a school, but it is a business. And I mean, if you were doing a job, your personal proficiency level needs to be high. I'm not talking about what you're trying to get the student at you being a teacher. And if you're saying, well, I'm mad and I'm not going to do it, then you're not doing your job. And we need to be increasing people's wages. I respect that across the board because Maine, our wages are low. And the teachers are not respected for all the I have lots of teachers in my family. Are not respected for the time that they actually place. They say, well, I only work 9 months or whatever, 8.5 months, or I said, well, that's not true. They're going to have to be prepared, and there is a lot of. It's not walking into a place at 8 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and saying, I'm all done. There is so much involved in the teaching profession. Should those people be paid adequate based on their skills? Well, yes, no different than a finance person or somebody else. There is a level they have to maintain their certifications and whatever else. So if they're talking about the ability to acknowledge what people do, so we make them comfortable and they stop forgetting about, oh my God, I can't pay the telephone bill, and and they're making those kinds of decisions because they want to teach and they're dedicated to that, and they can see the successes with the students, and they have that, all those qualifications. For me, I say, okay, I could see if you make your staff happy, and I'm not saying going to the extreme, but making them happy so they're earning wages and they're not saying, gee, I have to run out of here because I have a second job. And some of those less affluent locations, teachers might be making a lot less than some other places that have the ability to do it. And
true, but student performance, though, people. I live in Yarmouth, and Ethan has pointed that out to me more than once, that Yarmouth is the #1 school system in the state in the last ranking, and it's a very wealthy town. Obviously, it's got a lot of affluence in it. Is it the money, though, is my question? Or is it the fact that it has a lot of professional parents that have time to spend with their kids, that are really involved in the community, and it's a really good teacher-parent network working together to educate children with a lot of programs that are offered in a variety of different ways? I mean, is it the core amount of money here? And I ask this because when you look at, like, Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. spends probably 3 times whatever Yarmouth does on that's not a real statistic, but it's a significant amount more than we spend on our students, and their performance is absolutely awful in every way. I mean, they're graduating kids from high school that just are not qualified to even go on to higher education in so many different ways. So you see money in places like that completely not work.
I see I see money in the basis of having everyone focusing on education. If Yarmouth is not feeling any pain, God bless them, and that's great. But they're not sitting in the teacher's room complaining about their livelihoods. And they're not complaining about, I need to be working, I need a second job this summer, or I need to move. And that's how I look at it. I look at it on the basis that if teachers are performing to the level they should be performing, that they should be paid to the point where they're focusing on teaching, not focusing on where am I going to get the next dollar, not because there's a lot of fanfare in their homes. It's being able to work and say, I can go home and not worry about it. I don't have to worry about a second job. If that is behind, and they're working there is a distraction. I want to remove a distraction. I don't want everybody, I'm not saying we're pouring out money out there, but we need to move that distraction where some more lucrative communities are able to satisfy that. So I don't have the teachers sitting and saying, next contract, we need more money and be fighting. And as a result, you're spending all of this processing time, but you're still should be focused. I think you should be focused totally on your job, but I can't tell you what.
Yeah, I guess that's all true, and we can move off of the subject in just a moment.
And that's where I see it.
I guess where I might differ from you is that my wife, having been a teacher in that system that I'm referring to down there, they got paid fine. I mean, they were paid very, very well, so they weren't.
Well, that's a lot of other distractions.
Well, yeah, there are. I'll grant you that.
You want me to
but
go to
what I'm
Washington?
getting at though is, well, I'm sure, but I mean, what the lessons of a place like Washington, it's not just Washington, by the way. It's like it's a variety of it's like Miami and even places, mostly urban centers, right?
Absolutely.
Where you have a variety of different challenges because of the population that's in the school system. It comes from an area that has maybe more reduced school lunches, plus more challenging environments with parents. I mean, there's like a lot of complications that make teaching harder, just from the get-go.
That's right.
And I guess that's my point, is that Yarmouth doesn't have that problem. They've got basically, a very homogeneous town of people that all have rather professional jobs, and they have plenty of time to devote to their kids. And so you got a couple parents that are involved in going to the PTA meetings and going to their parent-teacher conferences, and so you have sort of well-adjusted kids that are growing up in an environment where everybody's involved. I mean, how does money solve a more challenging environment like the major urban centers in America, which I think Portland does experience, and I think in some ways Bangor does a little bit, and Lewiston Auburn does a little bit. I mean, you have a much more challenging environment there because of just the nature of the type of city that it is.
Absolutely, because of the transition of individuals, our transition of disabled individuals into the school system is a great idea, but you need to supply teachers with adequate supports and aids, because it becomes a physical location, and it probably did in Washington, where you're not thinking about, I need a second job to pay the bills. You're okay because you're being paid all right, but there's other issues that you have to address that could derail you, because your classroom could be made up of a multitude of people who have challenges, and some of them could be mental challenges or physical challenges, and the individuals needing support in a school system you're going to find in urban centers. That's where people are going to go, because that's where they might have the best classes or special ed available for individuals. So we were talking about money and the relief of money, and then the focusing. But then if you want to talk about the diverse types of students in a classroom, and if because money is not there to supply an aid or two aids, you're trying to have someone's, excuse me, but could be having a meltdown. And at the same time, you're supposed to be teaching these individuals and providing support, and you're multitasking as a teacher. Money assists in providing those extra assistance. We transitioned individuals in that, and I totally supported that, but we also needed to provide the support for that. So if Yarmouth has lots of parents' participation, and that's good, some of the smaller urban centers will do better, than the central service centers, because some of those parents are working and are not part of going after school, and they may have a very disabled child that needs a one-on-one, and because they can get distracted. And
but the service centers have always had that kind of challenge for quite some time now. In the 1990s, Maine performed, I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's, top 10 certainly in the country in terms of educational performance. And it seems like we have been declining, and Portland was Portland then, and Portland is Portland now. It hasn't really changed all too much. I mean, there's some minor changes to sort of the makeup of the schools, I suppose, but they are a service center, so they've always had these challenges where they have a very, very diverse background of people that are coming in. And so is it our standards, maybe? Is it the way that we're teaching kids? Is it the involvement of the community is changing? Is it something else, or is it money? And I'm very skeptical of money being the answer and the solution.
I just think it's because I know from the benefit system that they decrease the number of aides in the classroom, and now you have an increase, even though you say it hasn't changed. There's an increased population of individuals that needs additional support, and then that's where the parents say, why don't you just put the disabled children here and the regular,
and we mainstream them instead.
And because this is part of their livelihood. But those are the ones that you can't stand up and have a single teacher in the classroom. You need to have other individuals, and when they're not able to fund at the full capacity, that's where it gets. I found even in a small school that I went to in the last 2 weeks, they said we used to have 2 aides and now we have 1, and some of the students that have come up are more aggressive, and I have to deal with defending myself because they get aggressive, physically aggressive, and so I feel sometimes not able, because I need to direct myself there rather than having someone else that assists us and could eliminate that stress point, and the class could continue. The class, it's us being able to make sure that all the students are experiencing a well-rounded education, but at the same time providing the assistance so those individuals who need extra help because of their challenges have it, and it's not being deteriorated because we don't have enough money. So you used to have 2 aides, you're going to have 1, and if that one is sick, you're going to have to be alone on that class. It's the structure. It hasn't changed any, but it is changed. The number of students are different.
That is a fair point. I mean, there is the way that we've treated special needs kids for quite some time has changed over time, and there certainly are a variety of needs depending on, it's not necessarily a gigantic spike necessarily, but there can be spikes and valleys depending on just who's coming up when, right?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a specific example. I have a family example. I have a granddaughter, went to college at the age of 16, okay? She went through the regular school system, okay? But it was a reverse thing. We had to push outside to get additional stuff because she was always challenged. But in the meantime, so-and-so next to them had special assistance. It's a dual thing. I mean, she was extremely successful in the school systems that she participated in. They were in Bedford, and she's the reason this weekend she got her associate's degree, and she isn't 18 yet. So those are kids whose capabilities were tested and challenged, and she was able to rise to a certain level. But she was able to be independent, and someone was able to focus on her and said, oh wow, I can give her and challenge her, this is her learning ability. And that happened in the school system, and that happened with her parents being very aggressive and advocate, and her mother was a teacher, is still a teacher. And so the Yarmouth people, when they're more sensitive and they can go and advocate and whatever else, you do need that involvement, and it does make a change, and you see the people rising to the top. I saw that personally, and I see it in the school systems. but at the same time, I see where less money caused them to say we need to cut some positions.
Well, what you're talking about, I think, is right. It also, I think, has something to do with the amount of money that's not just being spent in raw numbers, but also what's being spent in the classroom, like what's actually going towards the effective education of children. And Maine does actually rank pretty low in that. We don't spend enough of the money that we do spend in the classroom, which is why Governor LePage keeps talking about administrative cost, right? And we had Governor Baldacci do that before him. Seems to be a sort of bipartisan critique of our current system, is that we just spend too much money on administration. There's been a couple different approaches to try to address that administrative challenge that we have. You've got the Baldacci consolidation plan, which seemed to be almost at a point of a gun. You know, it seemed like a lot of communities were very unhappy with the method by which that was attempted, but it was an attempt to really consolidate it down. And then you have sort of more of a carrot approach, I'd say, that the LePage administration has had, where he's trying to incentivize them to do it, I guess, instead. Is that a problem, A? I guess is my first question. Do you think that the administrative cost is actually something that is preventing more money from getting in the classroom, or is that sort of a distracting argument? And B, if you do think it is an actual problem, is there something you propose to do about it? Is there a way that you'd like to go ahead and tackle that administrative issue that you think would be more effective than the previous two governors have tried this?
Well, I think you need to evaluate no different than when I was mayor. I had the best position being chair of the school committee and mayor of the city. I was able to pull everybody at the table, and they had no choice. They had to talk to me about staffing, process, operations, why so many people, what exactly was taking place, what was the outcome, and minimizing excess, and looking at buildings and the proper schooling atmosphere and the whole bit. And I think across the board, administrative-wise, for me, I think it's used as a slight derailment. I mean, can everybody fine-tune? Yes. But is that the major cause for some of the stuff that's happening education-wise? I don't think so. I mean, because of all the mandates and the recording and everything else.
But do we need as many superintendents as we have? I mean,
right. And I think because
could we make do with 16 of them, like one a county, or could it be?
Well, you know, I look at the size of Maine, and I thought about that when they talked about the consolidation, and I said, well, then it's somebody like living in another state, because you really don't have firsthand what's going on, or you're on the road all the time, and most of your time is traveling. So how effective are you, anyways, in working with your staff and making them perform at a level that's necessary? I think there's a support team. I mean, I can't be teaching, but I should be directing. And if you're directing an entire county, how effective are you? And at the same time, remember the school systems in the surrounding area that is usually collaborating, and you have a lot of teacher workshops where that superintendent is pulling people together and they're brainstorming, and it's very effective. So for me, it's not going to be, you know, me say, I know the way to do it. No, I would be actually talking to these superintendents and bringing them in and say, what are your difficulties? Let's look at these things and figure out how we can get more money into the schools to have adequate support for all these students and make sure they're all successful. And at the same time, how do we keep these the teachers here so they don't run away and go to another state?
So to move on in the category of education up to higher education, because you had brought it up earlier before.
Yeah.
What's the state of higher education in Maine? I mean, what are the challenges that we're currently living through with higher education? Do you view it as serving the needs of the students of Maine? Is it something that's actually producing students that end up becoming workers in the economy, and are things aligned the right way in Maine, or do they need to change?
Well, I thought they needed to change, and that's why I initially called the University of Maine's president, Southern Maine's president, to start with. And then because I thought they need to be gearing to the job market that we have, you know, making sure that the individuals understand whatever they're pursuing, where could they go, and could they stay in Maine? And so that's when he said we're actively working and had been doing internships. So not just for no reason internships, because I used to see that before. I just need an internship. Can I just come and do something in your organization for the next few months and put this many hours? But that they were actually matching individuals to their aspirations. I would like to be in this field. I don't know if I want to work for a private industry. Do I want to work within a company? And so they were retooling, as he indicated, their structure to be more aggressive and working with the college students who are more apt to talk about, you know, I want to go someplace, I want to make money, I want to get a house, I want to, and so he said we're doing more of that with their deans, working with the students. And I was excited. I said, but now we need to get you to be working like with the Colby colleges and the Thomas colleges and the St. Joseph's colleges, and looking at doing that for everybody, because every student should have the opportunity to look and say, gee, maybe I want to stay in Maine, you know. And I know one of the candidates is saying, well, you know how we're going to get them to stay here, because they're going to do community activities and we're going to give them their last 2 years as free tuition. Well, I said, first of all, how are you going to afford to do that? Because you can't not say to any of these institutions, you know, you can't collect, because that's their revenue in order to operate, and that in itself is a big complex situation. But I think if we collaborate and find a way to get the students to stay, and the revenue obviously increases by we have more students, more businesses, and so forth. I mean, it's a growing type of situation. The University of Maine, which is, you know, supported by Maine, that's where my focus was. So there's money going there, and how do we use it? Is it more effective? And I looked at the University of Maine in Orono in their research and development, and talked to some of the people who are now doing research and development, who were students of Orono and who came from out of state. And how did, you know, why did you stay? You know, and it's just by chance. Sometimes I'm at the right place at the right time, and I ask a question, they say, "Oh, that's me," and say, "Why? Why is that you? What was changed, and what made you stay here, and what did you need in order to do that?" And I think we need to be doing more of that with the students. It's great you're coming here because this is where you want your education, because it was well-rounded. But how can I get you to stay here? You know.
I guess that sort of goes to the core of my question about being aligned with the economy, right? I mean, we know right now that we tell basically every kid that goes through high school, you should go to college. You'll earn $1 million more in your life if you do. You're going to be at a better pathway forward if you do, so you should go to college, kid. And then oftentimes they find that they go to college because they think that they're expected to. They get a liberal arts degree that gives them skills in nothing, and then they leave with a gigantic amount of debt and don't have that sort of dreamy job that they thought that they might. Meanwhile, there are trade jobs that are just going unfilled left and right. They earn really good money. You know, go be a welder. Seriously, right?
Absolutely. Material fabrication.
Absolutely. So, and we're not telling kids to do that. So I wonder how you fix that problem. I mean, what's the governor's role in trying to encourage people in that direction? Because I'm looking at the community college system right now. The community college system right now is just a cheaper liberal arts degree to me. You're seeing a gigantic number of kids that are going there because it's just a more affordable option for them to get what they think is the 4-year college degree that they're supposed to get. And they're not treating it as what I think the community college system really should be and kind of used to be before we had its current incarnation, which is a place to learn trades and skills and things that are going to serve you well for a really affordable price. And that doesn't seem to be what we're doing right now.
And you go back to my beginning when I said, you know, you start at middle school and you start looking at the uniqueness of the kids and what they enjoy doing. In high school, you start fine-tuning them. And you're back to the plumbers, the electrician, the carpenters, the culinary services, the metal trades, which you brought. There is all those possibilities, but you need to start, the teachers need to be sensitive to seeing something. You know, my son at the 7th grade, the teacher put a piece of paper in front of me and said, "This is your son." He had designed something. I knew that was him, because I used to see it all the time at home. And she said, "No, but this is the rest of them." And there was no comparison. It was unbelievable. And 8th grade, he wrote an essay. He wanted to be an architectural designer. He is. He's 46 years old. He's an architectural designer. He knew those are things he liked. But teachers have to be pulling that, and the centers of technology in the high school need to be pulling those things and doing the education which allows them to experiment. This is what I'd like to do, and then getting them to the community colleges so they get their licenses for plumbing and electricity.
Some of it has to do with stigma, though, doesn't it? I mean, it seems like people treat those types of jobs as though they're less less attractive than going to a 4-year college and getting a white collar degree or something like that.
And that's our fault.
And it is. That's my point. Is that being a plumber or being a welder or being a mechanic or doing a blue collar trade job it's not just that it's dignified hard work that gives you a lot of great values. It's also that it does pay really well, and there's a lot of the jobs that need to be filled too. And we're portraying to kids that are going through, guidance counselors are telling kids to fill out their college essays and all these other things that they're supposed to do because they were just expected to. It's the next rung on the ladder. It's the next phase. And I wonder what a governor's role in doing that is, other than just, I guess, being out there stumping for it. No, I mean, is there policy that you can do behind it that would actually encourage that?
I don't know if there's policy, but I think there's a marketing situation that you have to be doing openly, and then having teachers challenge that. We want to be those that are highlighted. I found in the 97, I worked for York County Community College, and they had the largest consortium for metal trades. They were doing quality money from Augusta, and mayor at $10,000 wasn't enough money, so I was doing the extra jobs. I coordinated their programs in the morning and in the evening, before meetings, after meetings, whatever. And we did a metal trades thing for York County Community College. As I said, there was 8, like Hussey Seating, CNC, and whatever else. We placed, in that 3-year period, I placed over 300 people in the metal trades. That's the kind of thing we have to be aggressive with. Now they have some, as a result of that, that was specialty money, and they grew into getting funding, and they have those programs now at York County Community College and also Southern Maine Community College. That we're doing those things, but we need to be now working on the high schools to encourage. I did the program in the Center of Technology in Bedford. So I was able in the summer to get some of the students involved in that. We need to be marketing our students for the skills that they have and encouraging them to take the jobs that they like, which will be well paid, just like you said, that will provide a livelihood. They'll be able to establish themselves. So touching base in middle school, as I was seeing people are starting to show interest in cooking and something that doesn't take place anymore. Is home ec, and
they don't do that anymore, do they?
And workshop.
Yeah.
Now you have to end up at the high school for the Center of Technology, and I'm finding industries. There's a business in Bedford. It's called Hyperlight Mountain Gear.
Yes,
you've heard of it.
I have heard of it.
And before, we used to have home ec. We used to do stitching. Okay, they can't find anybody to operate a sewing machine. That is really sad. Now we should be directing, now we know that, we should be directing our centers of technology or some of these middle schools in starting to do that, because we know there's a need out there. And this person's trying to expand and can't expand because they can't find a workforce. But we're not providing that skill anymore. So we need to be working businesses, school, and not just, colleges. We need to be working in the high school, looking at not having to say you have to go to college, but we have a skill here where you could make good money, and you'd be happy. It's something you enjoy doing. And we sort of went off and said, here, we got to learn this. We have these tests you got to take, and if you don't reach this level, your proficiency, you're not going to be successful. We've gone totally to results and not necessarily positive results to what the students could do.
Well, I want to make sure that we wrap up here so that you actually have an opportunity to do something else today.
Thank you.
And we've been doing this for a little while, but I do want to make sure that we touch on the issue of healthcare before we let you go, and I just want to ask you a couple questions about it really quickly. I guess the first one relates to, of course, what's on everybody's mind right now. The legislature is going to be coming back and talking about Medicaid expansion, among other things, tax conformity and whatnot. But we had a ballot question that was passed, and there is disagreement on how to handle that now that it has passed. Let me ask you 2 questions about it. First, the easy one. What do you think should be done about Medicaid expansion? Do you support it as a good idea? Should it be funded? Should we go there? Should we expand Medicaid? It is a good thing to have expanded Medicaid. 2, and related to that, is what is your view on the whole will of the people question? Because we have this debate whenever anything's passed, from marijuana legalization to Medicaid expansion to taxes for schools to clean elections to ranked choice voting, right? is there something super special about a vote of referendum by the people? Does that mean that it has something deemed upon it which really shouldn't be changed and has to be implemented by the legislature? Or does the legislature have a duty to implement it right? Or do they have the complete freedom to say, that's a bad idea, you know what, we shouldn't do that? Where do you come down on that question?
Well, first of all, Medicaid expansion, I do believe it should occur. I think we need a healthy population. I think it'll also assist us, I believe at this time, based on my limited information on the opioid situation and getting those people to counselors. I've been working with consultants who are addressing the opioid thing, because we have I think we have 12 pilot programs throughout the state of Maine on federal money. There was a 2-year project. So I've been talking to some of them, from police force and what would help, and they said because some people don't have any funds to assist, so they keep circulating the system. They're working at minimizing stuff, but they need to have some support. So, and for me, also, the Medicaid dollar that's put in there, remember I worked 20 years in the nonprofit arena, so I know Medicaid programs is funded currently about 36% is state, and the rest is federal money. And some of our Medicaid programs in the state of Maine, not all of them, but some of our Medicaid programs, we also then give 6% of that dollar we got back to the state of Maine. So I'm saying, I think there's an opportunity for us to utilize that so we don't put a burden on anybody, but be able to pay the Medicaid expansion. Okay. On the other referendum, I think that was the
it was pretty much on
that
just
that Medicaid expansion.
I mean, I used Medicaid expansion as the example, but really it's a question about all referendums. I mean, what is the role of the, quote, will of the people? Is it even the will of the people when you have, sort of a certain fraction of a certain fraction that showed up, of a certain fraction of the registered voters, you know what I mean?
I know, I think you look at past history and the number of referendum questions which were as sensitive as the ones that seem to have been going through. They didn't exist because they were being done by the people we voted to go to Augusta to represent us and to be standing strong on their feet. We started this whole thing with me saying, a respect needed to exist there so people would start talking about issues. And I think it got derailed that people started saying, these people aren't talking, listening to us, so we're going to take our own, take it within our own hands and go forward. And then you have some very strong advocates who were determined they were going to make whatever they were going to put forward stick by saying the people outnumber the number of people who's supposed to be representing us. I don't think any changes should take place in the referendum process, but I also don't believe so many referendums should be taking place. That it should be the works of the legislature, not fighting against people's referendums. But as a result of them feeling that they didn't have a voice and no one was listening, they took charge, or maybe a small group took charge and encouraged the rest of them to take charge.
Well, did they though? I mean, like the one that we're going to be faced with this year is obviously the latest Maine People's Alliance question, which is related to universal in-home care, and that's being funded by what is it now? Like something $400,000 or $500,000 of money from George Soros, which I'm not going to use him as boogeyman, but it's money that's not here. It's from somebody else, a special interest elsewhere, and that's happened on the right too. So I'm not, singling out a sort of left-leaning issue like that. It happens frequently that outside interests decide to have a little sandbox in Maine because it's a cheap date. You can go and buy a lot of media, and you can get people to sign petitions and knock on doors pretty easily, quickly, and cheaply. So is it even really a reflection of the will of the people, or is it a special interest tool now that's being used a lot?
Well, I like to tell you, as an individual from the nonprofit arena, it is an interest of the people for people to stay in their homes. There is a program that existed through the Medicaid process, which was in-home supports, okay? And it was geared to children and living, and being supported from outside people. They're just taking it and saying, how do we keep the family involved, lower the prices, and address the elderly 65 and older that need assistance. There is something that had been addressed and worked on by nonprofit organizations without any money, who didn't help publicize it on the basis of how do we keep people in their home, because nursing home is so expensive that they lose their dignity because everything they have goes into just paying, and they sit in a room or end up in a nursing room. And they were trying to do the quality of life. You know, we have a lot of people who care about people, and I respect that. And so this is an issue that it may have just come up, but it's an issue that has been there, and I'm going to tell you it's been there for at least 10, 15 years that I have known that has been a discussion with the nonprofits. How do we get these people?
Okay, that's a fair point. But then why did it take the money of an outsider to really generate the quote will of the people in that situation? Then why wasn't it a grassroots movement of people thought that was a great idea, who got it on the ballot before, like 5-6 years ago?
Because now you have the baby boomers, and there's a larger population, and before people lived with the nursing homes, and their lifespans were very short and sweet. Right, we exist for a lot longer. People are being financially hit. Nonprofits didn't have the voice. Also, I have to tell you, the nonprofits has the philosophy: if we go and make too much waves, then we could get cut, and they'll take even more money away from us because in the past, you know, we're debating. So they said, you seem to have a lot of time to come and see us. You should be doing your job. So maybe we're paying you too much money. And those are debates that I have had with Augusta in the past. You know, administrative-wise, we have too much money going to administration. If you can come up here and spend time, you know, advocating for money, then maybe you've got too much money. You know, so nonprofits, and I know that. I've sat in meetings with hundreds of people sitting there. It was, you know, and the answer was, Donna, don't create waves. So we always wait for hopefully someone on the outside gets impacted. They go out and find somebody who's going to be willing to advocate. They found somebody with money who came in and said, this is a good location. They're primed for it. There's a lot of people that are interested, and I can go out and advocate for this. And you see the nonprofits? We're on the sidelines. And you see in that situation, the nonprofits are on the sideline. Those people who are helping or assisting those individuals are really, to this day, I can tell you, I just left the organization, and it's, Donna, let's be careful because we don't want to have a bad name, and then they cut our funding, and then we can't serve the people who really need our help.
Well, final question for you before we let you go. Obviously, we've talked about a lot. We could probably have this conversation for 5 or 6 hours. There's plenty of stuff we didn't get to, clearly. Okay. But of all the things we've talked about today, and maybe some of the things that we didn't have an opportunity to get to, what do you view as the sort of most motivating factor in you running for governor? What would your administration be remembered for more than anything else? What would you want to charge up the hill the most on for all the issues that we've talked about, or some of the ones we haven't yet?
That we were able to actually sit down and talk about some key issues, and be able to be transparent to why we weren't going down that road or why we were going down that road, and provide the financial backing to it's a yes or a no, or it's a delay process because of this, rather than, I think, respect. I think they'll say she followed through, consistency. It will be policies. I mean, looking at the needs of the individuals, and having, I'm an individual who likes to plant a lot of seeds, and plant them so that they grow and get
Is there a specific one that you'd like to tackle? I mean, there's always, when a president gets elected, it's always the first 100 days. It's their first really big idea that they really want to tackle. Is there one that just, you know, you feel like you got to solve this one thing?
Well, solve this one thing.
Clearly, you want to solve 100 things, but
yes.
Oftentimes when you have somebody who's running for something, there is something that really charges them up that they want to make sure that they address more than anything else.
I think the use of the funds that we have. I mean, obviously that's my background. I keep saying that. I want to initially, because I don't have to sit down and look at the books, but I do have the ability to ask a lot of questions. So I would like for people to feel comfortable that all of our tax exempts are being effectively used to produce something positive for Maine, and that if we increase or change anything in the tax structure, that people understand and they're willing to take that risk on. And if we're able to establish new revenues, that people understand how beneficial that can be, and that provides the tools for us to grow the economy. And I think, and at the same time, that means that education is impacted and medical issues are impacted. But it's definitely the revenue stream that has to be looked at, so that we're not using and abusing it, but we're using it effectively.
All right, well, Donna Dion, I want to say a special thank you from the Maine Heritage Policy Center for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.
Again, obviously we could keep going for quite a while, but it was really fun to sit down with you and get your perspective on these issues and see where you'd like to take the state if you end up being a governor. And I'm sure if you do, then we'll have plenty of other conversations going forward. But for our part, we want to say again thank you to Donna Dion. We have a number of other candidates that are also coming in behind her. We're talking to as many Democrats, Republicans, and independents as possible throughout this whole process. So stay tuned for more from the Maine Heritage Policy Center.